This podcast is proudly sponsored by Gyro Drilling. They provide world-class drilling solutions for all types of projects. They specialise in auger, aircore and RC drilling. Head to the team at Gyro Drilling for all your mining needs and see how they can help you with your upcoming project. Hello, I'm Ben Kostrich and this is the Market Bull Podcast. As this podcast grows, every subscriber helps. From those of you who watch this on YouTube or to those that listen on Spotify and Apple, every follower helps. If you do this one favour and hit follow on whatever platform you find us on, I promise I will continue to look and find fascinating people across the world and bring their perspectives to you. Thank you and enjoy this episode. So hello, I'm Ben Kostrich and this is the Market Bull Podcast. Joining me on the show today is Brad Rogers, the Managing Director and CEO of Jupiter Mines, which is listed on the ASX under code JMS. It's predominantly focused on the manganese sector, and I haven't spoken about this commodity for a long time, and recently it's got a lot of attention. So happy to have you on to pick your brain, but firstly, welcome.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks for having me.
The manganese attention has really accelerated over the last really handful of months, and you'd be in the exact position to understand it all. But before we dive into Jupiter Mines, I'd like to get to know your background in the mining and exploration scene. Not that this is in the exploration area, but talk us about your history and how you got to become the MD of Jupiter Mines.
I started my career working for Arthur Andersen in consulting to governments on privatisations, big PPPs, a lot of the projects around Perth I worked on the kind of advisory side, and then moved into a firm called Main Sheet Corporate, which again was a Australian boutique. At the time I was there, a subsidiary of Freehills, wholly owned, which was a bit odd, but doing much of the same sort of work, corporate strategy and boutique corporate finance type advice. And then went into GRD, listed company that is no longer around. When I was there, it owned Macraes, which is now Oceana Gold, owned Minproc, which is now part of the AMEC group, a big mining EPCM firm, and was growing into infrastructure. And so I joined in the corporate development group there and worked across the portfolio of businesses, really from an internal corporate finance, corporate development perspective. And then from there went to a company called Biz, which some of your viewers may not know, Ben, but it's a very large mining logistics business. Used to be Brambles Industrial Services. Yeah. Does a lot of things still around Australia today. Great business, 140-year-old Australian business that is on 40 different mine sites around Australia and Indonesia, doing a bunch of different things, including bulk haulage, including for manganese operations, iron ore, coal, bauxite, etc. Different parts of that business as well, but all mining focused and a really kind of leading franchise around bulk haulage movement. So I was at Biz for 15 years, the last 7 years of which was as CEO. And, I think as a CEO, being in a role for 5 to 7 years is a good amount of time to have formed a strategy, executed that, and then you should think about whether it's time to move and let someone else have a go. Exactly. Yeah. And so I was right in that window at Biz and joined Jupiter. And Jupiter is a fantastic opportunity which I thought would be a good fit for my skills and what I'd done, in particular at Biz, but also beforehand. As we'll talk about, there's a great mine there that's already up and running, and there was an ambition to grow. The mine in South Africa is a very long way from port, and logistics in South Africa are constrained. And so my background in mining logistics, I felt I could bring some value to the table there. But also functionally, the background in sort of growing businesses with a focus on M&A, that's part of the growth strategy here. And starting off with a strategy and formulating one that wasn't there, which was focused on growth and selling that to investors. So really great opportunity before I arrived at it, and an opportunity that I thought I could bring my background to add value to.
So we flash back 2 years, you're taking on this new role with as you said, a mine that's in operation, working on the logistics of guess, distributing the product, which is manganese, and we'll go through that a bit. But I mean, taking on that role initially, what really was the company like then? I mean, you just said it's in South Africa, but I mean, if you're discussing what Jupiter Mines is to someone that's never heard of it, how do you describe it, and what was it like when you took over then to progress to where you are 2 years down the track?
Yeah, it's a good question, Ben, because I think a lot of people haven't heard of Jupiter, notwithstanding it's an existing story and a successful one. Part of my job is to tell that story a bit more and have that more widely known. Jupiter, as you said, ASX listed, has been since 2018. Jupiter as a vehicle goes back a lot further than that, but in terms of its current incarnation, listed in 2018, around this 49.9% share in Chippy, the mine in South Africa. Jupiter is based in Australia. And so since listing in 2018, that mine has paid very good dividends to its shareholders, including to Jupiter as a 49.9% shareholder in the mine. And Jupiter has paid those dividends on to its shareholders. And so there's been a great yield from Jupiter in that 5-year period of time. We paid 20 cents in dividends in the last 5.5 years since listing. Share price today is about 30 cents, but the mine has 120 years of mine life remaining. So really nice, successful story around paying dividends. That was the company that I joined in 2018, and the successful strategy of the company up until that point has been to pay dividends, and it's done that very well. The ambition is now to continue to pay dividends, but also to grow Jupiter in ways that we've communicated to the market in a strategy we put out in March of last year. So that's what I've joined to do, and we're about 1 year into a 5-year strategy.
And I mean, you're talking about that. I mean, the growth. I mean, what really is a part of that strategy? If you're saying from the top line, the idea of growing. I know we look at the electric vehicle market and some of the opportunities with that, and I know Jupiter Mines is looking at that. Where else are you really seeing that sort of growth potential building into Jupiter over this 5-year period?
Yeah, so there's 4 limbs of the growth strategy. The first is around operating efficiency. Chippy is located in an area called the Kalahari Manganese Field in South Africa. That's a really tightly packed section of land that has a lot of the world's most significant manganese resources contained within it. And Chippy is one of those significant manganese resources. Our ambition is for Chippy to be the most efficient of those mines from a cost perspective, and it's pretty much there already. It's about the first or second most cost-efficient mine amongst those mines. But obviously, you want to continue to move forward and improve your cost base. And so the first limb of our strategy is really just about that, taking the great head start we've got already and in targeted ways improving operating margins and improving operating risks. A large part of that is around bulk logistics. 35% of Chippy's cost base is logistics. About 8 to 10% is mining. And so when we're thinking about improving margins and improving risk, there's a much bigger opportunity and risk in the logistics side of things than the mining side. Mining's really important. It's also important we continue to be stable as we have been and improve. But in terms of growing margins in a meaningful way, a lot of that is about bulk logistics. There's then a second limb to the strategy around what's the right production level from. It's been the 3rd or 4th largest manganese mine in the world from a production perspective for the last 5 years. But it has more capacity to grow, to produce even more than that. Long mine life, open cast, fairly straightforward processing. And so part of this strategy, we're producing at 3.5 million tonnes per annum. Should it be 4? Should it be more than that? We've got installed crushing capacity on the face of it for 4 million tonnes per annum. So that's a kind of logical balancing point. But the work there is about going back through the mine plan and working out what is the optimal level of production, balancing what's there at site, balancing any investment, balancing the market and mine life as well. So that's part of it. Part of it is about thoughtfully over the next few years acquiring more mines in that same region. We're there right now. We're a successful player. That region has 73% of the world's manganese reserves within it. And over the next 10, 15, 20 years, a lot of very significant mines elsewhere in the world will be coming to end of mine life, and that's going to draw more opportunity to large, long life mines in South Africa, like Chippy, that have a long way to go, that are open cast and can step into that market opportunity. And so acquiring more volume in South Africa is part of the strategy as well. We've got a battery strategy, which we can talk about in a moment, but that's about taking ore that's already been produced, byproduct ore from Chippy, and directing it into downstream processing to value upgrade the activity that's already there and leverage the strengths that we have available to us. And then the final limb of the strategy is all of that stuff is good. We want to be known in this space for sustainability. That's something that customers increasingly and investors are focused on. It's actually a really good story at the mine to date. That's a mine that does a very good job by any global standard from all of the sustainability metrics point of view, but Jupiter needs to do a good job of telling that story to its investors. And we want to be able to flag what we're going to do going forward. And really we're focused on initiatives there that will improve financial performance as well as sustainability performance. And the nearest term, most obvious target in that space is putting solar in at Chippy. It's already self-reliant if it needs to be. The mine's connected to the grid. Grid power is not necessarily a reliable thing in South Africa. We have our own diesel-fired power station, so we're off the grid if we need to be. But solar is a lot better way of going from a self-reliance point of view going forward, both from an ESG perspective, but also from a financial perspective. There's a fairly nice payback replacing that diesel-fired power station with solar.
That's a very comprehensive overview, and I think that probably does paint a picture of the next 5 years.
Yeah.
And I mean, the idea there of the logistics and minimising that, and if you can go through, I might go through each bit and sort of unpack a bit more, but I mean, the logistics side of it is really getting it from the mine to the port to the customers. And I mean, I was looking at a few of the presentations and you mentioned about the isolation of where it is and sort of building out that, reducing costs because it's already a low production mine.
Yeah.
What sort of areas are you guys looking at, if I can press you about that, to sort of bring those costs down? Because when you look at that in the pie chart, you're going to struggle to bring down 8, maybe to 7% costs in a mine, but 30% in logistics down. There's a lot more room to, as you said, increase the margin. So what sort of infrastructure or thought processes are going through the team to achieve that?
Yeah, so the first thing I'd say is that Chippy, the site is run by a very good management team that have already done a great job in this and other areas historically. And so that team is known for innovation in logistics, and there are lots of examples of that. The challenge in South Africa for these manganese mines, Chippy amongst several others in that area, is that the mines are about 1,000 kilometres away from port. So a long way, and rail is constrained. So rail, obviously, for any bulk material is the cheapest and best way of moving that material from the mine to the port, but rail is capacity constrained in South Africa. And that's really in the case of manganese because manganese exports have grown so much over the last 20 years that they've outstripped the rail capacity and continue to do so. And so for that reason, just using Chippy as one example of these mines that are all faced with that same constraint, I mentioned before that Chippy produces about 3.5 million tonnes per annum of ore, but we only get about today 1.8 million tonnes, so a little over half that in rail capacity that's allocated to us under what's called MECA, Manganese Export Capacity Allocation. The rest of that material, 1.7 million tonnes if we're producing 3.5, is going out via various other means, road haulage in particular. And road hauling 1,000 kilometres is a long way. The methods of road hauling in South Africa, I think, are behind the 8 ball from an efficiency point of view. And this is coming from my previous position, having done a lot of that sort of work around Australian mines, Indonesian mines, but also seeing how that is done in major bulk producing countries in the world, in South America, in West Africa, in Mongolia, etc. The payloads, I think, should be increased, and that's something that your viewers in Australia would be familiar with. The truck sizes in terms of payloads in mining operations have grown increasingly over time. And there's a good reason to do that. If you increase the payloads, you decrease the number of trucks, you decrease the cost per tonne, and you also improve safety and sustainability outcomes because you've got commensurately fewer trucks moving around. So that's something that I think needs to happen over time, not just with our operation in South Africa, but more generally. We're utilising, and so is everyone, 35 to 38 tonne payload trucks driving 1,000 kilometres. In Australia, that would be unheard of. In most parts of the world, that would be unheard of. And if you can increase that payload by by reducing, you'll reduce the number of vehicles, you'll reduce the costs, and naturally you'll reduce the number of trucks that are bypassing towns and bypassing other users on the roads, and so it's a safer proposition as well. So there are lots of other ways that logistics can be improved. It is unfortunately a major part of everyone's business in South Africa because rail is constrained. And so the starting mindset is actually just accepting it's not going to go away anytime soon, and engaging with that part of the business in a way that brings efficiency in. And that's really about taking a longer term view and working with partners there to deliver the sorts of outcomes that we've seen delivered, not just in Australia, but in other mining regions of the world. And that's a lot to do with improved safety standards, use of technology to monitor people adhering to those standards, and in a sort of targeted way, increasing payloads so you can improve efficiency, improve the viability of all of these mines, improve margins. And given, as I said before, how much logistics is of the cost base, that's really a big focus of that part of our strategy.
Yeah, and that's all in the comprehensive 5-year strategy. And then on the other side of the transportation, we know is the rise of electric vehicles. And I mean, going back in time, I probably wouldn't have been familiar with manganese and its impact in and the usage in the batteries. And that's probably the other opportunity that you just mentioned that you're focusing on is the scoping study to look at, now I'm going to have to read this, the high purity manganese sulphate monohydrate for electric vehicles. Bit of a mouthful, and I didn't want to do the acronym. But talk us through, I mean, that decision to go down that path, there's a massive opportunity with the electric vehicles, but a lot of people just go lithium. And it's almost the bee's knees of what an EV or a battery is. So talk us through the decision and the process of how you guys are looking at the manganese role within that. And again, that's in the scoping study, which is all part of the big strategy that you guys have got.
Yeah, thanks for the question. And so firstly, manganese, and you can shortcut it, battery-grade manganese or HPMSM. I think there's a rebranding opportunity in there somewhere because it is a mouthful. The benefit of manganese in lithium-ion batteries, or in fact in sodium-ion batteries or solid-state batteries, same thing, is that manganese is abundant in the world, so you don't need to worry about the actual ore running out and therefore being a constraint. It's relatively cheap compared to other cathode materials, nickel, cobalt, manganese. Manganese is used to some extent in NMC batteries, Western batteries that are high performing and high cost. Chinese battery types, which up until now and looking forward are LFP batteries, don't have manganese in them, but they're looking to add manganese. So there's a value proposition for manganese in that for NMC battery types that are expensive but high performing, you can add more manganese, reduce in particular cobalt, and lower the cost of the battery. It brings cost efficient energy density, and it's also widely available. And it also brings energy stability to the cathode. On the LFP batteries, Chinese battery types, they are going to become LFMP batteries. And that's because those batteries are cheap, but they're range constrained. Manganese can, on a fairly cost-efficient basis, bring energy density to those battery types as well. So manganese hasn't, I agree, been thought of too much in this space, but that's going to change over the next 10 years or so. We can see that through the work that we're doing in the scoping study that you just mentioned, both top-down working with industry consultants looking at their forecasts and increasing use of manganese, but also bottom-up in the discussions that we're having with vehicle manufacturers and also with battery manufacturers. They're all looking at changing their chemistries towards greater use of manganese, and that really picks up around 2028. That's when we're targeting being in the production of this material. The strategy for Jupiter is that at Tshipi we've got a great mine there that is already producing, as I said before, 3.5 million tonnes-ish of manganese ore that is sold into the steel market, and that's what generates all of Tshipi's revenue. That mine casts off what we call low-grade manganese ore that's about 30 to 32% manganese contained, sells it when prices are high in manganese, seaborne trade that is going into steel markets. In most markets, though, it's not valuable to sell a lot of that material, and so we stockpile it. Producing high-purity manganese sulphate, monohydrate or battery-grade manganese, you can do that with that low-grade material because battery-grade manganese It's not actually high grade manganese. It's 31.5 or 32% manganese contained. It's high purity with respect to everything else. So it's got low tolerance for anything else in the sulphate, but the manganese contained in the sulphate is around that same head grade of that material that we're side casting. So part of this strategy is we're already producing an ideal feedstock through what we do today. We don't need to change anything at all, and we actually don't have a valuable use through the cycle.
Yeah, technically it'd be waste
for all of that material. It is waste. We
Yeah.
regard it through the cycle as waste, and we cost it as waste. So there's an opportunity to be competitive into that space, to bring value to the downstream by taking, a byproduct material and directing that into its highest value use through converting it into battery grade manganese, and that does require that material to go through a chemistry set before you spit out HPMSM, which is what goes into the cathode of the batteries. Nickel, manganese, cobalt. There are other things that can go into that cathode, but manganese's great advantage, as I said before, compared to the other choices, is more available and cheaper, and also good from an energy stability point of view compared to some of the other mixes. And so for all those reasons, there's a market opportunity, and we think we've got a competitive advantage in getting into that market, in part because we've got a resource there that is already producing this material and has 120 years left to go.
And I think that's sort of the revolution of where the strategy is going, is that, technically this is waste, and then optimizing it to use it for a new demand that's really accelerating quite quickly. And we'll touch on, I guess, the tailwinds for manganese in a bit. But when you're looking at that and progressing down this scoping study, I know there's sort of timelines and milestones and all towards a final investment decision. If you're mapping out when people and investors and listeners can anticipate those decisions being made, I mean, you said towards 2028 is when the automakers are going to be sort of knocking at the door and asking for it. But in the lead up to that, what are some of the key milestones that people can be anticipating?
Yeah, so we've been going on this for a while. We've just published a summary of our scoping study, and that's on our website for anyone that is interested, and that was, call it, up until the end of last year. That scoping study said the economics look good in our view. We can do this technically. We've taken chippy low-grade ore and made compliant battery-grade material out of it using our own process. We've highlighted North America and a couple of locations within the US as an ideal location to do the conversion. So we'll export ore from South Africa and do the conversion, and there's lots of reasons for that, but close to the market, grant funding, etc. So a number of important outcomes have been achieved already. What we're doing now is working on a pre-feasibility study, and that will go through until the end of this year, and that will see a pilot plant constructed, deepening discussions with potential customers in order to get to a point where we're confident at a sort of non-binding offtake level in volume and price. Get the full funding model in place, again, non-binding but defined. And then we'll be looking to go into a DFS, and that's the final stage before final investment decision. PFS this year, DFS next year, final investment decision back end of next calendar year at the earliest. And then you've got a couple of years of construction commencing in production in 2028. So that's the sort of timeline. But we've committed to provide updates to the market in all areas of our strategy as we've got updates to provide, and this will be an area that's quite active this year. So I'd expect, we'll have something to say obviously when we finish the PFS, but the intention is to be able to provide updates as we go as well.
And one of the fascinations with all these materials that are coming into the EVs is the price. And particularly before we started talking about the manganese price, and again, the chemical equation is probably, again, at a different price altogether, but the raw material, the demand and supply has been a little bit, in balance at the moment, but there's a bit of discussion about what's emerging. So I always like to get an idea from within industry and someone that's probably living and breathing this day in, day out, what is unfolding in the manganese sector. And you said before, a lot of it goes towards the steel industry. But good to paint the picture of, where we use manganese, where the current demand is coming from. Is there much supply, and what are some of the dynamics that are unfolding within that market? Yeah,
good question. So manganese has many uses. It's used mainly in the making of steel and other steel-like materials. It's used in the making of finished aluminium products as well. But in the use of steel, and that's the predominant use today. Manganese has always been in dry cell batteries. So the sort of battery that you'll have in your remote control at home to watch TV, for example, that's likely got manganese in it. It's made, used in agriculture, in medicines, in paint, in glass, etc. And as we just discussed, in lithium-ion batteries and in kind of batteries of the future in general, rechargeable batteries, regardless of their chemistry. So lots of different uses. Steel use is absolutely dominant on the demand side. And so I've mentioned a whole bunch of things that manganese is used in, but steel use for manganese makes up 90 to 94%. And so really, if you're thinking about the price for seaborne manganese ore, you can really ignore everything else, many of which require downstream processing anyway. From a volume perspective, the bulk of that is being driven by steel demand, and the bulk of that is Chinese steel demand. So if you understand iron ore and its drivers, you probably understand a lot of what you need to know about the manganese demand profile and what drives prices up and down on the demand side. Anyone that's making steel around the world, so Indians, Malaysians, Europe, North America, a little bit here, all of them use manganese. You need manganese. What it does for you in steel making is it's the thing that makes steel hard. Without that, steel would actually be quite brittle. And so the addition of manganese is irreplaceable in the making of steel, and it's always been used. And that's why manganese has been a critical metal as defined by the United States government since the 1920s or 30s, because obviously it's more recently been critical for lithium-ion batteries, but it's always been critical for
infrastructure.
And for tanks and planes and things that you need in war times. And so it's got a very long and enduring benefit and necessary and irreplaceable benefit in the making of steel. As we think about all of those uses from a demand perspective, the two that we're focused on is the steel market, where we're currently a large player already through Tshipi. As I mentioned, it's the third or fourth largest manganese mine in the world. And that's an important market we're an incumbent in, and a lot of our strategy is about actually deepening our exposure and our margins exposed to that demand set. The use in lithium-ion batteries, or as I said, any type of rechargeable battery, is tiny from a volume perspective right now, but it's going to go through enormous growth. That part of the demand set for manganese is really a margin play, not a volume play. The scoping study I mentioned before is thinking about taking 100 to 130,000 tonnes of low-grade manganese ore per annum and converting it into producing quite a large amount of battery-grade manganese in the global scale. That compares to our mine, which is already producing 3.4, 3.5 million tonnes per annum for the steel market. So the steel market's bulk ore. The battery market is really about value through margin rather than through volume. So that's the demand side. The supply side, there's about 60 million tonnes of ore in the world that is demanded and supplied from a total ore perspective. There are different grades of manganese, just like there are different grades of iron ore, similar for manganese, and they have different applications in the making of steel. But if you ignore all of that and you're just talking about the tonnes, about 60 million tonnes is the total market for manganese per annum. The major producing geographies in the world, South Africa is the largest, makes up about 36% of that 60 million tonnes right now. Australia has been significant. Gabon in West Africa has been significant. Ghana, China, Brazil, etc. South Africa is the one that stands out because although it's the largest market share right now from a production perspective, as I mentioned before, it's got about 73% of the world's manganese reserves. And so in a lot of those other very significant manganese producing geographies, including Australia, they're coming to end of mine lives. They've been significant players for the last 50 years, in many cases with higher grade manganese. They are running off. South Africa's seen its growth in the last 20 years. It's forever been a smaller manganese producing country, but it's really stepped up in the last 20 years or so. And it's got a number of mines, Tshipi amongst them, that has a lot of mine life remaining. And so part of our growth strategy over the longer term is to say we think there's an opportunity to position ahead of a contracting supply side out of Africa. And we think that's going to produce an opportunity for our mine and others in that area to be able to take more market share. And that's part of the longer term market conviction that underpins our growth strategy.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's one of those, as soon as you start drilling down on it, you just see how much it's needed and utilized everywhere. But unless you actually are exposed to that, you just go, oh, it's just a commodity.
Yeah.
And you get that sort of distance from it. But a point you referenced earlier, which was the ESG side of it. And within the electric vehicles, that is a key component when you look to what Europe is doing with their sourcing of raw materials as well, and North America, even Australia, and a lot of these countries. But ESG is now becoming a foundation pillar for investors and large equity firms getting involved. So talk about some of the things that you guys have been implementing into that. So, ESG, environmental, social, and governance. A lot of people just know it now as the acronym. But talk us through why you guys have made that such a key component of your 5-year strategy.
Yeah, good question, and there's lots of answers to that. Firstly, it's the right thing to do in every respect, but I would say that our approach to this has been quite pragmatic. We think there are things that we can do and should do that make a difference from an ESG perspective that are also really sensible business things to do, and putting in solar at Chippy is part of that. Taking a step back, our single investment today, we plan to sort of change this, but our single investment today is that half share of Chippy. And so the rubber hits the road really at Chippy, and that's a good story right now. So in every respect, from a safety perspective, from a community perspective, from all of the environmental metrics perspective, that's a mine that's performing very well compared to any mine in the world. And so part of what we need to do as Jupiter, as the major investor and major public investor in that mine, is to be able to tell that story so that people who want to understand it and engage with it, and it's important to their investment decision, can understand we're starting from a great spot already. I think part of it is also philosophical. There are lots of choices that you can make in terms of how you pursue sustainability as part of your strategy. And the choice that our board has made is that we are going to be real and pragmatic and led by things that add value to the business financially and also improve the business from an ESG and a risk perspective. And so that's really where we are directing our effort. This is an area that increasingly investors care about, and so that's part of it as well, but customers, and in particular in that area that we've spoken about of electric vehicle batteries, that is a ticket to play in that space. People want to know, car manufacturers want to know where they are sourcing their material from, how that's actually manufactured, what your standards are, what your reporting is, etc. And some of them have quite exacting requirements around, are you signed up to different UN and environmental standards, etc., because they know that they adhere to frameworks that you have to follow. And so that's almost a certification of your capabilities in that particular area. So it is all encompassing. I think in manganese, where a lot of it goes into steel mills in China in particular, you haven't seen that big customer side push yet, but it's coming. It's an inexorable trend across the world. And so as you think about any of our stakeholders and any of the stakeholders for the mine, from customers to investors, but to employees, local communities, etc., when you boil all of it down, it's about doing things safely and sustainably so that you are responsible, you're not negatively impacting people, and that you're improving over time so that the value that miners can deliver and do deliver isn't deteriorated by any negative externalities.
Interesting. And speaking, you said there that a big decision from the board, and I think it's also important to understand who else is around you on the board. So can you break down a few of the key personnel at Jupiter Mines, and how have you sort of helped build it, probably in country, but also here in Perth where we're sitting and talking? Who's a part of this ever-evolving team?
Yeah, so it was a great setup on this side as well from when I joined, so I haven't had to do anything really there apart from telling the great story that's already there. And we've got 3 main strategic shareholders who have been involved in this story at Jupiter and at Chippy since before I joined, and they're all able to practically assist as we pursue this growth strategy. So the largest shareholder of Jupiter is a South African company called Insimbitli Holdings, who Australians may not be as familiar with, but it's quite a prominent group in South Africa. They're the largest shareholder of Jupiter. They've got a little under 21%. They're the largest co-investor at Chippy. They're invested in a number of the other manganese mines in the Kalahari manganese field as well. And they've really been responsible for pioneering a lot of the growth in that field over the last 20 years or so. So very visionary and successful people, led by a number of quite inspiring individuals, including Saki Makazoma, who is the chairman of Chippy, the chairman of Vincent Bentley, and he's a very high-profile businessman in South Africa. So that's Vincent Bentley, and they're, as you can imagine, with the success that we've had so far with Jupiter co-investing alongside Vincent Bentley, who pioneered a lot of these situations, they're a really important partner for us and have been a big part of the success of Jupiter as well as Chippy itself. Our second largest shareholder is an American fund called AMCI, who are invested in a number of bulk mining situations around Australia, and they're also invested in downstream battery plays, including in North America. So they're a long-standing, quite active, sizable private fund that's invested in Jupiter and has been there for a long time as a stable shareholder. They have a lot of great insights and connections to be able to assist across the business, but in particular in the battery side of the business, because they're North American, they're active in that space, and they have good conviction in that regard. And the third largest shareholder is POSCO, large South Korean conglomerate steelmaker. And so, they
want to make sure they get supply as well.
Yeah, so there's no off-takers for Chippy. It's all sold on the stock market. And so when you see prices move like they are right now, we've got complete look-through there. So POSCO have been and are a potential customer of Chippy, but there's no off-take arrangement there.
Okay.
They're just a very supportive financial investor. But again, POSCO has a strategy around growing into the EV battery space. They're a significant manufacturer already of cathode active material, which also contains manganese. And so you've, again, got a large company there that's a supportive, long-standing shareholder of Jupiter, but has practical ability to assist us as we pursue this strategy. So you've got three large strategic shareholders there who are all well established, have enjoyed the Jupiter story so far, and are able to assist in quite practical ways with our growth as we pursue it over the next few years.
And then, alongside you on the day-to-day, who are some of the people on the day-to-day activities?
Yeah, so those three shareholders are all represented on the Jupiter board. The board is chaired by Ian Murray, who people might be familiar with. He was the person who took Gold Road from an explorer micro cap to to quite a large producing company that it is today, having found Gruyere. So Ian is a South African originally who has a long and storied career in the gold industry in South Africa and in Australia, having moved over here, and Gold Road's probably the most noteworthy there. He came into Jupiter a little before me. While he's not a manganese career person, he is quite prominent on both sides of the Indian Ocean, and that's really what we're doing here at Jupiter. Successful listed story here on the ASX, but all of the growth focus is in South Africa. And Ian, as a non-executive chairman, was someone who understood all of the stakeholder thematics and a lot of the relationships that are already there. So Ian's non-executive chair. Scott Winter is in there as an independent non-executive director. Scott is someone who has deep mining and contract mining experience, including in Africa with MinRes and with Parenti, ran their West African surface business, their AMS, for a while, and he's been involved in COO type roles across the east coast of Australia as well, and is the CEO of a vanadium business right now. So really good group of directors at Jupiter. We have a small handful of staff alongside me as executives within the company. We have a lady in Johannesburg, Tracy Clote, who's the head of manganese marketing and is prominent within that industry. We have a CFO here, Melissa North, who works with me in the Perth office. And we have someone who's handling growth for us in South Africa. But that's it. Very small cost base. I'm kind of doing a lot of things myself, which I've come from a larger business with a big team, and I've joined one where it's really quite hands-on, and that's part of the interest. It's also our intention as we grow to keep that corporate base quite small. That's part of the reason why we've been able to pay good dividends. There is a team at the site that is funded by its revenue that's been there, and so there's no need for us to load up here in terms of operational resources. I'm on the board of the mine and I'm involved there, and obviously a lot of our strategies are about collaborating with the team there and the other investors in order to grow what's already a great business. But then Jupiter, I'm about how do we grow from there? And so it's really a corporate development effort, and so I'm working on that in a pretty hands-on way. And even as we succeed in growing, the intention is that we stay small here in Perth and the resources will grow at the operations in South Africa.
Well, we've unpacked a lot today. I mean, thinking out loud, there'll probably be a fair bit that people might go back and re-listen to. But if you're encapsulating some of the key takeaways, I always try and say 3.
Yeah.
But if there's 3 key takeaways that someone should think about after finishing this podcast, knowing that Jupiter Mines is going to be focused on, what would those 3 key takeaways be?
The first one is, if you don't know the story, have a look. It's well demonstrated. We've been listed and operating since 2018. All of the presentations that are on our website go all the way back to listing, and so you're able to have a look at the performance and in particular the success that Jupiter has had in streaming really good dividends out to our shareholders throughout the cycle. And that's because of the fact that we've got a great asset that we're invested in that's well run. So that's the first thing. The story today, before we do anything else, it's performed to date, it's paid good dividends, there's a nice yield that we've demonstrated from the story today. We have direct exposure to the manganese price. No debt at Chippy, no debt at Jupiter, and a stable operation at Chippy that has a long mine life remaining. And so when you have changes in the manganese price, and that's occurring right now, supply side tightness for various reasons, the manganese price has increased 34% over the last 6 months and should keep increasing. We released our quarterly last week, and that was our view based on what we're seeing in the market. We think that there's more upside because the factors that are driving that upside, which is all supply side action, tightness in the market for various operational reasons, should continue to run through the near term. Regardless, 121 years to go, you're going to go through cycles like you do in any commodity, and Jupiter is able to give a nice exposure to the manganese price. And we think that manganese has a really interesting future, and we've discussed a couple of the reasons why: growing use in lithium-ion batteries, but also longer term supply side contraction coming from mines that are coming to end of mine life. So what we're seeing right now is short term impact on the price, and while we think that is going to run for a number of months, the very interesting continuation of that thought is that over the next 5 to 10 years, some of the most important long-standing mines in the world will come to end of mine life. So all of that, whether it's short-term or long-term, goes to creating a lot of value there as these mines come to end of mine life. New mines need to be built. The cost curve gets supported. Prices go up. More value for people who are already in it. And then the third piece is one we've spoken about quite a bit today. It's the growth strategy for Jupiter. So today, before you do anything, it's a good mine that's performed well, that's paid good dividends to us. We've paid those on, and the strategy is to continue that same dividend policy. We've got exposure to the manganese price when it goes up like it is right now. That's good for Jupiter, and that's valuable for our investors as well. But this 5-year strategy is about recognising that we've got a great starting point, continuing that same policy that we've been following for the last 5.5 years and growing on top of that. And we've got a really comprehensive growth strategy that we released March last year that's on our website. It's got a lot of primer materials around the context for that strategy as well. South African logistics, why lithium-ion batteries, blah, blah, blah. So people can read that if you want. And so what we're positioning here, and the 3 key takeaways, is firstly, good story already. Secondly, nice exposure to the manganese price, and there's action there right now that a lot of people are familiar with. And thirdly, good growth strategy that will build on that story that we're well positioned for, that we're 1 year into a 5-year strategy on.
Yeah, the term is comprehensive. It's covering all bases, and I was saying I reached out to you at an event because I'd seen some of the activity starting to accelerate, and that's when, of course, interest comes in. And I can imagine, as opposed to gold, where it's always got some attraction, manganese is probably not the first one people jump to mind, but I think people have taken away a lot, and of course may have tweaked a bit of interest. And the website's a great resource. That's where I was going, trawling through some information. But if people want to follow and stay connected with Jupiter Mines, where can they go? How can they stay in contact? Who can they ask questions to? And that.
Yeah, so we're on social media. The website, as you say, is probably the right starting point. We do channel everything through there. There's contact details on that website as well, including emails for investor relations type questions. But we are dialing up the communications through the course of this year. We think that there's a fair bit we can say, and we're working in the background, and we're keen to keep people updated. So for people who are interested, go to the website, have a look at what's there already, but stay posted, because we'll keep providing more, and happy to take any questions people might have.
Yeah, fantastic. The code is JMS on the ASX, and there's always announcements going out there. But yeah, thank you so much, Brad, for unpacking the world of manganese and more so Jupiter Mines. But it's going to be an exciting year and onwards up until all this interesting stuff within the electric vehicle market, but more so just the demand supply for manganese. But yeah, thank you so much for speaking on the show today.
Pleasure. Thanks, Ben. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Market Bull podcast. Please remember that the topics and stocks discussed in this podcast are not financial advice. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to like, share, and follow. You can follow the Market Bull on all our socials and keep up to date with global market insights.